I would argue that psychological safety is the most important for the working class, but is sometimes harder for them. Let me tell you why. I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I research the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds. Two of the unwritten rules are compliance and indirect communication. Compliance is the opposite of psychological safety. Psychological safety is that you are allowed to disagree and bring up new ideas. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be accepted. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences if they're a bad idea, but it does mean you won't be demeaned and belittled. Compliance is when people are not allowed to speak up, not allowed to disagree, even if you ask them. You're really just looking for acceptance. And indirect communication is where you kind of talk around the point and cushion it a lot instead of getting directly to the point. Direct communication is more common among working class people because typically in blue collar jobs, that is needed for safety. Indirect communication can be used for good intentions, like trying to preserve social harmony, though it often doesn't. It can turn into passive aggressive mean girl stuff of people trying to appear nice in boardrooms and then having side conversations with people who agree with them later, and that's actually the decision. It can also be used to try to evade accountability, to avoid making promises that you're not going to keep, and to keep yourself from being held legally liable. Now, you can speak indirectly and still have candor and be truth telling, but I think that often gets conflated, at least in American corporate culture. You can nicely or with respect for someone's feelings give a direct point, but that is not often what we see in elite environment. If you are nice to someone and then they don't get promoted because they disagreed with you, that's not psychological safety. So arguably, who does a lack of psychological safety benefit is the elite. People who want to be in charge without taking feedback, without being disagreed with, who want to have it their way or the highway. And this is repeatedly shown to run into business problems and even safety problems. I'm writing a book on the unwritten rules of work right now. The link to the waiting list is in my bio. And it was actually hard for me to narrow down the case studies for the chapter on the unwritten rule of compliance because there were so many. I remember telling someone I went to grad school with that part of a working class rural pride is in being not offended, because she was always worried about offending people, and that was new to me. And she was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "There's like a pride in not being offended and not being seen as soft." And that while that can be good in some situations, we can also be so hard on ourselves that we were working against our own interests. So while the working class benefits the most from psychological safety because it helps redistribute some power and is anti-classist, they can have a hard time accepting it because you also grow up in a working class environment where working class culture really values a strong work ethic and being tough and not complaining. And so when you hear terms like psychological safety, you can feel like, oh, that's fuzzy guzzy feel good stuff. And, I can take it. I'm tough. I don't need that indirect communication. You don't need to handle me with kid gloves. You can give it to me direct. And I just want to clarify that these are not opposite things. You can directly and with kindness, even if it's not considered nice, provide psychological safety. Candidness is actually required for psychological safety.